Alan_08 is here. It's been over a year since I've posted the original video to this channel. So the 11 subscribers I've somehow maintained. Thank you. This is an update video followed by a subject. The update is simply that, as commented on my Y-Vlog video, I have already created a couple of other videos. Some of that will be up soon. In the next few days I'll be recording a follow-up value video followed by a response video to a Ryan Bergen. He posted some questions that I told him I'd reply to. That will be titled accordingly so that only those interested in that content will spend time watching it. Largely that's going to be regarding a political question as far as what I think the optimal socioeconomic setup of civilization is. I mentioned to him that that's something that, for my standards, my response is not going to be up to par with, but I'll do the best I can with what I know, or with what makes the most sense at this time. Okay, so that's the update. Now the subject is strategy, as far as instilling in people ethics as a top priority, but particularly of interest to myself is the optimal strategy for convincing and persuading more of the public of the descriptive philosophy of Efilism and the logically consequent ethical obligations that are deduced from that, and ultimately the optimal strategy for maximally impacting more people to be more likely to actually behave or act in alignment or in accordance with the ethical obligation of preventing suffering. So, as many of you are probably already aware, viewing this, Inmendham has posted on his official YouTube channel after a few-month hiatus because he received a strike on there. He's been posting on his Do Not God website and some other mediums, but his recent video on his Inmendham channel is largely sort of a response to some comments in one of the forums of his Do Not God site by a recently emerged YouTuber. Her channel name is Ethicalogical. And as stated, this video is going to be revolved around their dialogue that specifically that regarded strategy. So we'll dig in. So first, quickly, Ethicalogical did actually mention that even if we begin to succeed in this aspect of public power, she would still like to see preserved this more raw type of communication, the more unfiltered sort of stream of consciousness, organic process of interaction between antinatalists, Efilis, and thinkers generally engage with these ideas, which I probably would agree. There seems to be another type of value in that, at least in the sense of refining the arguments and things, engaging amongst ourselves, as well as the more mainstream sort of method. Alright, so it's been repeated before, but one of the strategies that I came across in comments and things was having a variety of arguments in order to be able to tailor your method of persuasion to the individual or particular demographic of people that you are speaking to or conversing with. We know that people have different varieties of value systems, preferences, types of ambitions and goals, things that they care about, etc. I know that I, for one, would prefer if it would be more practical. You'd be able to be pragmatic, to simply use more purely logical, sort of philosophical methods of convincing others. But the reality is that you may need to personalize the method of persuasion many times. Although there is variety in sort of more personalized methods of persuasion as well as the purely logical sorts of argumentation. So within the context of philosophical or more purely logical argumentation, one could, for instance, reference Inmendham's zero-sum game analogy. Someone fails to concur or they refuse to concede with that, then you could employ Benatar's asymmetry argument and detail the logic of that. The point is, there is a variety within the philosophical context of arguments that could be used, whereas it is the same, actually, with more personally applicable methods of persuasion. An example could be used of within the context of animal product usage. and someone financially supporting the factory farming industry and things of that nature, if this individual cares very much about their physiological condition and performance, upon the grounds that consuming more vegan sources of fuel would lead to better results for them, in that, with that goal in mind, upon those grounds, that individual could be convinced to do so. And ultimately, if that would lead to them consuming less animal products at the net scale level, that would be a degree of a victory. However, as has been explained, when you detract away from the basis that this is about ethics, you compromise the probability that someone is going to maintain the mindset. So, because those are things that are the more personally applicable methods of persuasion seem to be more in line with individuals' preferences, generally speaking. Whereas, for example, if you are able to convince someone of the self-evident, truth value of the fact that suffering is an intrinsically negative value, and that is something that they internalize into their understanding, that fundamental component of their value system that is going to be more deeply rooted and not as easily faded out of their mind. Regardless, there are certainly some circumstances that would probably illustrate how having a variety of arguments is superior strategically. Then we have, on another level of expression, sort of to speak, other tools for strategy. So with forms of art, for example, Inmendham referenced Forever Wolf Films' The Efilism movie, which can be used as a reference point, a sort of example of a possible way of expressing vital concepts through a means other than, cold, hard, logical argumentation, or, more personally applicable arguments that are nonetheless, in a form of an argument rather than a piece of art. Another item of pertinence to strategy is sort of these individuals who, for example, they sort of self-identify as free thinkers or something like this, where they seem to have, as part of their self-esteem, seems to be determined by their idea of how they can handle the truth and things like that. They take the red pill. So I, in accordance with this sort of idea, I'm gonna note the following. And I initially was exposed to and initially began critically assessing the arguments for intrinsic value, antinatalism, and Efilism, being less honest and genuine in the way that I legitimately entertained and examined the ideas, would have harmed my sense of self, would have harmed my self-image, because seeing as the top priority principles that were consciously defined, at least sort of by my executive function, so not besides the fact that there are crude mechanisms that drive our behavior as well, but on a conscious level, having maximal intellectual integrity and doing one's best, actually applying oneself, doing whatever one can to attempt to become the best version of oneself, were and still are the sort of fundamental principles that sort of act as the guiding pillars of for myself, my cognition, my thought, and my behaviors. So completely contradicting that would yield much cognitive dissonance and existential friction. Okay, next item will be something that I briefly referenced in my Y-Vlog video, which is that I have a known state of being insufficiently informed on a number of subjects. that I feel basically obligated to learn more about in order to actualize my theoretical potential, my theoretical maximal potential in terms of impact. So to varying degrees of depth and relevance, I intend to learn more about history, political science, mathematics, economics, law, physics, a number of subjects. But this plays into something that Ethicalogical mentioned, which is that in terms of strategy, we should probably utilize the simple fact that there are currently many different people who, to varying degrees of depth, specialize in all sorts of different fields of study and professions and so on. Varying levels of expertise that we have at our disposal, potentially. So we essentially have, on one hand, the probably greater efficiency of the sort of collective chain reactions of contributing to solutions that would manifest on a wide scale from a sort of commonly understood basis of the sort of root cause of the problems, the core problem, which is simply suffering itself, versus the relative inefficiency of endeavoring to solve all of the many indirect, resultant, implicated, particular problems more so on our own. So basically a contrast between a sort of individualistic approach versus a sort of collective priority of convincing everyone of the root cause of the issue. So I would argue for each one of us, depending on our particular strengths, weaknesses, and so on, we should sort of probably just strive to find whatever the optimal balance for ourselves would be. But yes, doing the sort of Renaissance man thing where, as I say, you're sort of operating more in the vacuum of your own thinking, attempting to learn so much about each of these many different subjects, discerning what the solution should be, and functioning in that manner seems to be, if you simply just do that to a disproportionate degree, yes, you will not be using all of your resources. Using this vaporizer to transition from smoking burning cigarettes, which I fell into the addiction of in the last few years, because yes, the evidence seems to currently seems to indicate that it is much less harmful for your cardiovascular function and your overall health, probably. In my recent last few months, I've been using this actually more so than I used to smoke. Cigarettes seems to reflect that. But anyhow, this segues into the next point of relevance to strategy. We all know the cliche that once someone knows better, they would reasonably expect it to do better. But an unfortunate truth is that we seem to live more by what we feel, not by what we know. For this point, I would simply I would highly recommend for anyone viewing this to check out the YouTube Great Tai Cho video, Words Don't Suffice. I'll post a link in the description box of this video. The central idea that I would be referencing from that video is what I just mentioned. Inmendham uses the example of addiction, and specifically with cigarettes, how he could sit there and with full degree of intellectually justified confidence argue that it's a complete truth of a statement, that it's a toxic, unnecessary, idiotic, something along those lines, addiction. But that he fails to feel that because it's something that he still finds desirable. And that, again, sadly, we go by what we feel more so than by what we know. And that is a problem. But that's just of note here with regards to strategy. I think that it's something that we should reflect on. And how can we hopefully extract something from that knowledge that could be useful for strategy. not use propaganda, anything like that. Still, we need to be honest in convincing others, but perhaps it would be pertinent if not only in the context of once someone potentially is convinced successfully of something, that they may nonetheless may not be sufficiently motivated to comply with that new knowledge behaviorally. Because we are, depending on your age and level of experience, you're so habituated already into your current personality, your current lifestyle, and things of that nature. So, which that ties into something else of note that Inmendham mentioned, which is, he mentioned that in the past he had essentially posted up graphics in his home, just completely surrounding where he would, generally be situated, of various animals that he would find some sort of beauty or attractive characteristics in. Simultaneously, he had set out on a table a multitude of animals that it was known regularly underwent suffering and all sorts of horrific experiences and pain on a frequent basis in the world. Something that would have the opposite effect of the sort of out of sight, out of mind phenomenon. So not necessarily a strategy with regards to communicating and convincing others, but more along the lines of self-regulating one's own psychology, so as to sort of maintain an orientation, sustaining one's mind towards the right goal or towards the sort of agenda that they've consciously defined as having supposed merit. Okay, perhaps the last item. So I just recently and finally began reading the Benatar's Never to Have Been work. And that leads to the idea of publishing a book or books on the subject of antinatalism and Efilism and so on. So that is something that has been an area that many of you have seen in comments sections and things. That seems basically certain individuals seem to be obliging certain other individuals, not necessarily obliging, but just pushing that as something that they need to do. But with that, I would state, yes, I mean that certainly could be helpful for the cause, but I mean we all have a responsibility to if once we understand the philosophy, do whatever it is that we can do, and then, not carry some sort of movement or cause on some individual's back. You sort of see that with on the left, right? With once Bernie Sanders failed in the recent presidential election cycle, it demotivated certain progressives and things. But Yes, a movement should not be just completely, it should be about the idea, and individuals that are connected with that, or that are advocates of it, or supporters or defenders of it, yes, we're all soldiers in the fight. So let's not just completely invest in and expect any one person to carry the sword. Lastly, hopefully this material has at least stimulated someone's brain in the positive direction, or set off a light bulb in someone's head as far as an idea or an awareness about how we can seriously tackle this as far as strategy, something that's not yet been discussed or highlighted. So if you have a proposition, if you have something of caliber, something you seriously believe to be of value to the discussion, I am eager to read the comments.